that this would be a really good time for us to discuss using the elements in alchemy, especially when practicing manifesting things that we want. Because a lot of times when people think of elements, they think of their astrology chart, which, yes, is very important, right? And very crucial and good for your understanding. But the elements play roles in all of our lives, right? And it takes many different forms. So I didn't come up with this chart, but I made this chart so then you can have a better idea and sort of a reference guide when utilizing elements in your manifestations. If you notice in all occult practices, they utilize the elements. These are very useful. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, let's start with Earth. So, Earth is to be, to exist, stability, and permanence. Good for material profit and worldly ventures. So for what I'm manifesting right now, right? Job of my own, right? Like my own business, getting out of debt, that kind of thing. Those are worldly material profits and gains. So I'm going to be using Earth. That way too, when I develop my business, it stays in permanence, right? So Earth element is really good for those grounding ventures that you may have. It is heavy, weight, cohesion, okay? Its color is yellow. It's quadrangular. Its mantra is Lam. It has to do with smell, okay? Skin, nose, anus, toes to knees, and bone, all right? All those have to do with the earth element. It has to do with ego. Interesting, you would think that fire has to do with ego, which it does, but when we get to fire, you'll see the difference. But earth, because ego is most dense, that's actually an earth element there, is ego. Ego, and the direction is east. Another note I want to point out is that when you're working with elements, you're going to start seeing how they come into your life, right? So for example, when I bought my house, okay, there was an inexplicable desire to paint it yellow. I just had to paint it yellow. I wanted it sunny, I wanted it happy. I had no idea about the elements, right? However, what I unintentionally, subconsciously did was surround myself with the earth element. I myself run very high of fire and air, so I get exhausted quite easily. I have a lot of gusto, and then I lose it, right? But every time I came home, I always felt really good, and I still feel really good and really humbled and grounded. Little did I know until recently that I have been surrounding myself with the permanence and the weight of the earth element. So it's good to see in your life too where these elements are actually playing a role in perhaps your coping skills or things that you're naturally kind of drawn to. That's where you can kind of get a clue as to what's playing a more predominant role. Okay, let's continue. So, next we have water. Water is good for creative influence on worldly events. Can be used for a time, okay? So the reason why it can only be used for a time is because water is fluid. It is constantly moving and it changes form. So when utilizing the water element, you are not going to get permanence. You can only use the water element for a time before it changes form. Okay, good to know. It influences thoughts of self, like so self-perception, and worldly affairs. So if you're trying to develop confidence, water element is excellent as a tool, as an elemental tool that you can utilize in order to gain that confidence. Okay? So in order to gain confidence, I might actually incorporate water and earth into an entity or into some kind of alchemical expression that will then work towards me manifesting, right, the continued confidence within myself. Because let's not forget, Earth has to do with ego, and confidence and gaining an authoritative figure is an ego thing, right? You are affirming that you are there. Water helps with developing that, but it's not there to stay. Earth is. So, something to think about. Let's see. Okay, so it's cool, right? Water is cool. It's fluidity and contraction. Its color is white. Its sign is of a crescent moon. The mantra is VAM. Okay? VAM. Taste. Things that are tasty, right? That's water element. I know when I get super fiery and stressed out, I like to taste things. I'll eat, right? Almost to a fault sometimes, but I can eat. That's me trying to put out my fire with the water element. Okay? It represents all bodily fluids. It's good for discrimination. Okay? And its direction is west. Okay. Next, we have air. Air is great for ideas and literary pursuits. If you are to sit down in the flow state of the air element and write something, it's probably going to be a massive hit. It's probably going to be fantastic. So for all you writers out there, air is your element. Now here's something to keep in mind though. When it comes to material gains, do not use. Okay? Don't use. I totally made that mistake. Don't use the air element. Not good for material gains, because air is erratic. It is constantly moving, and it's not as dense as Earth. So when you're using it for material gains, it's going to flutter in and then flutter out, just like an idea. Okay? Air is good for ideas because they come in and then they leave. There isn't any permanence with it. So for material gains, do not use air. Okay? It's erratic. It's motion and movement. Its color is blue and gray. A blue-gray. Its shape is hexagonal. The mantra is YAM. YAM. Touch is a sensation of air. Muscular expansion, right? Muscular expansion, hey. Contraction, hands, skin, heart to mid-eyebrows, okay? And it's good for psychic content. Really good for building up psychicness, okay? Air element is excellent for that. Its direction, sorry, I got something in my eye. Its direction is north. Okay. Let's go to fire. Fire. Fire bursts an ego attachment. So fire isn't necessarily the ego. It is the attachment to the ego. It is a thing that pushes you towards the manifestation that you want. I want the money. I'm going to move towards the money because the money is mine. It attaches an ego to that thing that you are developing. It's the first thing that takes form, okay? So fire is very useful for gaining motivation in something, right? However, beware, because fire is also extremely destructive. It can be used for change, growth, and evolution. So it's like a forest fire, right? They're scary and they tear down entire ecosystems, right? But from the ashes of what was, those ashes can become fertilizer for new growth. So fire is destructive as well as constructive. It clears the way for growth. So fire is excellent if you have to get out of a situation real fast. I don't give a fuck about what happens in that situation. Okay, if you just gotta get out, fire's your thing. Okay, that's your element. Although I would of course be wary because fire, like I said, very temperamental, just saying. Okay. Hot, heat, and expansion. Okay? Its color is red. Duh. Its shape is triangular. The mantra for fire is Ram. Ram. Represents sight. If you have good sight, you probably got fire element working for you in a really nice way. So props. Represents appetite, thirst, and sleep. These are all the things you need in order to gain fuel, right? You get hungry when you're low on energy. You get thirsty when you're low on energy. You want to sleep when you're low on energy, right? These are avenues for you to gain energy, for you to gain fire. That's of a fire element. Hunger, thirst, and sleep. Feet, eyes, navel to heart, okay? Fire. Thought and counter thought, okay? If you are debating someone or having a debate with self, that's fire element acting. Thought and then counter thought. It can be used for one or the other or both at the same time. Its direction is south. Finally, we have ether. Ether is excellent for spiritual gain, terrible for material gain. Do not use ether for material gain. You want to know why? Because ether isn't material. Ether isn't of this flippin' world, right? Ether is space. It is all of the stuff in between. It is the unmanifest. So actually, if you use it for material gain, it can be extremely destructive. So I recommend you do not use ether for material gain, okay? Instead, use ether for spiritual growth. It's good, it's a mixed medium there, okay? So it doesn't really have a form, it's mixed. It's diffused and space-giving. Its color is blackish. It's represented by a dot. You see a dot, that's ether. The mantra is Ham. Ham. It represents sound. You think of mantras and binaural beats, right? They help you gain a higher vibration. Why? Because they're operating through sound, the ether element. Emotions and passions. Now you would think that emotions and passions might be either water and fire elements, but as we just seen, those are just carriers, right? So here's why I think that emotions and passions are part of ether element. Because when we get raw energy, right? We're constantly getting energy coming through us, but it needs to be directed in a specific way, right? In order for us to be able to adapt and live. So wherever our focus is where that energy will flow, and it becomes categorized through these different channels. That's why they say whatever you focus on expands, because as the energy is flowing through, what you're focusing on is categorizing it. It's creating a manifestation right there of what you're focusing on. And so the energy will move through that channel. Now, what's the number one thing that determines our focus? Emotions. Emotions determine whether we move towards something or away from something. So our emotions and passions are simply where we are placing our focus and creating those channels for the raw energy. So that's why the more we have control of those channels, the better our results will become, because we'll be able to take the energy and place it in spots that we actually want that energy to go, right? Okay. So it also represents vocal cords. Like I said, mantras, singing. You ever sing and feel high relation there? That's because you're connecting to the ether element. Ears, mid eyebrows to top of head. Okay? It also represents your intuition, and the direction is middle and above. So let's talk about combinations for a second here now. Now that we know about all these different elements and how they play a role, let's see which combinations might work out for us. One thing to keep in mind too is even just on the superficial level. So for example, as an alchemist, when I'm manifesting something, I am not going to be placing my fire element directly with the water element, because water always puts out fire. Okay, that's not really a great combination. However, let's say I combine water and air elements. Okay, so not only am I now having a creative influence that's coming through, but I am also able to think clearly about my perception of myself and where I'm at. And air being good for ideas, right? I can get ideas about that perception and then utilizing the water element, mold those creative ventures and those creative ideas into perception of myself. I may want to follow up with it with maybe some earth here, or perhaps some ether if I'm looking to use it for a spiritual type of use. So if I'm creating an entity, I might want to tap into ether, right? I also might want to tap into ether and air. But air is really good for just getting ideas. So I would stay pretty light with the air. I would just use air element for the creative ideas and then tap into my water or my ether. Let's see what else here. What else can we see? So I, right now, am using earth energy, right? I'm using the earth element to get my material gains. However, I am also tapping into my water, but for separate reasons. I'm using that for my creative focus, right? So I and my creative influence, I'm not going to be using it at the same time as my earth element, because too much water with earth becomes mud and they can counteract each other. So I also space these things apart. I have different uses for the different elements. Only when I combine them is it very intentful for a specific result. But generally, I keep them separate for separate focuses. That way, they don't really intermingle too much. Anyway, this was a general breakdown of how to use the elements and what their actual meanings are. I'm curious to see how these elements show up in your life, and if you can determine what you've already been tapping into as a person that's outside of your astrology chart, just as general coping skills or as something that you're naturally attracted to. I'd be really curious to hear your results. Okay, many blessings on your journey, and I will be posting in the description these kind of descriptions too, because I understand that they're hard to see, and I've tried bringing this in closer to, zoom up on this, and it's just not happening. So I'm going to put it in the description. And next time, I hope to go further into the elements where we start to read our own faces and can determine which elements are playing a predominant role in our lives according to the shape of our face. All right. Many blessings on your journeys, and I will talk to you